So obviously, given the fact that this is a website that specializes in the old Japanese role-playing games, it would be remiss of us not to talk about probably the biggest release of the year in terms of JRPGs. Of course, we talk about Final Fantasy XVI, a game that I think is rather swell. If you've read his review, you probably know that Matt thinks it's rather swell. And I actually don't know what Trent and I would think.
I
Trent, what
think
do
I
you think
haven't
about
bought a
it?
PS4. That's what I think.
Oh, yeah,
PS5,
I've
I
got a
mean.
PS4. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
it's one
fair.
of those. It's like the first time that you actually have to have a PS5.
Yeah, one of the 6 games I think that's on the PS5 that isn't on the PS4 or any other system, which I think
Yeah,
is insane to me. It's like, why
I,
would
I,
you buy
I
a
think
PS5?
I think it's time that things start moving to the PS5. Like it's like what 5 years into this generation. Like
Yeah,
it's
it's been a
time.
while.
Mm.
It's probably not 5 years. It's probably what like four, three.
It's longer than you think it
3,
should be because
2020.
it feels like a
The
new
Switch
console
came
still.
out. The Switch came out first, so it was like
Switch is out in 2017.
yeah, that was ages ago. But like the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 wasn't like long after. Like that was like 2018, 2019. Sure,
2020. Because I remember I
2020.
bought one with my first like salaried job money. It was very
it,
Would you say
exciting.
that Final Fantasy 16 is PS5 buyingly good though?
Honestly, so far, I'm really enjoying it. I'd say if you had the means to get a PS5 to play it, I'd say yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, the what we thought we'd talk about with regards to Final Fantasy 16, I guess, is the way it handles the topic of war, because that is kind of key to it,
Mm.
and it is a very dark RPG because of it, and I think that's going to surprise some people, I guess. I mean, I know Final Fantasy's always been quite mature in tone, even if not, even if it's had its kind of light moments, but it's always had kind of serious storylines. And yeah, but this one kind of backs those storylines up with some very dark visuals and some very um, brutal combat at times and
There's
stuff. So
blood.
yeah, there's lots of blood. There's chocobos that get deaded, and yeah, and there's like, without trying to give too much away, there are like massacres of civilians and stuff that happen in it as well. So
That checks out.
it is a very dark game. It was inspired by Game of Thrones, and that kind of it wears that inspiration on its sleeve. And
It is apparent almost immediately as well. That's the best part. Is like
yeah,
you can see that they were like, just yeah, we want to do our version of that, and I think that's pretty neat.
yeah, and like I said, the core kind of theme behind it is the topic of war, and what kind of struck me about it, and I guess you'll see this as you kind of move through it more, Alan. I know you're fairly
Mm.
early in it at this stage, but uh, what really struck me about it was just how it showed how war is just kind of like a political game to the elites as such, that they kind of throw soldiers into battle without really caring about the consequences of it. And while there's all this kind of suffering that goes on, amongst the population and all that stuff, they sit there in their kind of ivory towers and just kind of direct units around like it's all just a video game. And yeah, it's one of those rare times that I've felt that a video game has handled the topic of war with that level of nuance to it, because in this industry, so often war is just kind of this entertaining thing that people go to themselves and just kind of, yeah, win the battles and conquer the lands. And
It's it's
yeah,
either war is entertaining or it's war is hell. We're not going to show you why it's hell, but war is hell.
yeah, it's that kind of thing. Way too often it's like, yeah, war, if you're involved with a war, it kind of sucks, but yeah, you're still on this grand adventure. So many video games kind of do that. It's really rare for a video game to actually show the consequences of war on people who either aren't participating or don't want to participate as such. Um, and yeah, it's really quite sobering. It's quite brutal
It's
thematically.
really exciting to see that I was thinking this the other day, but it's cool to see Japanese writers actually get a budget on the level of like a Ubisoft story, but with writers who aren't being withheld to the worst garbage I've ever heard in my life. Like it's just really neat. I'm
Yeah, I
really
mean,
excited about it existing.
it's nice that a AAA game as such has been able to actually invest that budget into telling a AAA story rather than just making a game that's fun to press buttons for. You know, like
It's also very fun to press buttons. That's the
it
best
is,
bit.
it is, but they definitely had something to say with this game, and that was the focus, I think. That they wanted to get across its kind of themes and very specifically tell its story. So the gameplay and all the rest of it is in service of that, which is the way I know we've talked about that on the podcast in the past, but that's the way I like to see things done, and it's not often done in AAA space, where everything about it is kind of in service of the key theme that they want to get across. So they've had this idea, they've got this topic, which is that war topic, and they've made sure that all the structures around it support that, rather than it just being that, rather than the story just being that shelf, dressing that
Hmm.
they put on at the end of it. They to justify the gameplay. So yeah, it is much more ingrained. Like the whole narrative is quite deep and layered, and that's why I ended up spending thousands of words talking about it in my review. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can't think of any other. There
Uh,
aren't too many other games that have really done a good job of discussing that topic of war. Like I put Final Fantasy XVI in the same kind of caliber as Spec Ops: The Line. You know, that kind of level of nuanced discussion about that topic. And
yeah.
it's the only way I think that war should be discussed in video games. Like if you're not going to take this seriously, if you're just going to make it this entertaining, quest, adventure, whatever, then you shouldn't be doing a game about war, as far as I'm concerned. So that was nice to see as well. I was quite concerned about it going in, that I thought they were going to trivialize it in some way, but they haven't.
Is it
Rather
kind of
nice.
connected to like, Final Fantasy IV? To me, that was one of the first games that I played where it
It
really
was
had you
actually pretty cool.
questioning. Yeah, it
Yeah.
questioned your loyalties. It questioned like your assumptions of you being fighting for the good guys or the bad guys, and like what you're really motivated by.
Oh, it's made so clear instantly that you are a part of a fucked thing. It's great.
Do you have like a
It's
similar
not,
role in this game where you're fighting on the behalf of somebody, but you're conflicted in that sense?
Well, in it,
but
you're
you're
kind
fighting
of
on the behalf of somebody who's neat, and then that person is no longer who you're fighting on behalf of. And oh boy, it's full on.
yeah. There's a a section at the start where you play as young Clive, as a kind of
Young Clive.
mid-teens, late teens. You play
He's
as
15.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you do have a section at the start where that sets things up. But the bulk of the game starts when you're a little bit older, Clive. I think it's 5 or 6 years later, isn't it? Mid-20s, and he is now a slave to an empire that captured him as a kid, and yeah, he's kind of thrown into this role in war where he has to go and kill certain people behind the battle lines. So that's really where it kind of sets up. And yeah, you're definitely right that it's very Final Fantasy IV, I guess, in a sense. It's not he does unlike Cecil, the Dark Knight, he's not willingly playing that role, but he's definitely
Yeah, he
fighting
sees it as
for
a means to an end.
well, yeah, he's definitely a conflicted character, and it's funny that you mentioned it because there's actually a scene in the game which is very directly
Is it
referencing
on the
back.
balcony?
No, there's a scene which is very referencing back to the key scene in Final Fantasy IV at the top of the mountain. I won't give away more than that.
Stop it.
I won't give away
Stop
more than
it.
that. I won't give away more than that. But there is a scene in the game which is a quite explicit reference to that because Final Fantasy 16 is full of references to the older games in the series, and yeah, that one it references back to Final Fantasy IV there. So it's funny you notice that, Harvard, because it
It's
is
interesting
definitely a
because
theme.
to me, Final Fantasy has always been like half the series has been like, let's go save the world. And the other half has been like, do you really want to go save this world?
Shit sucks.
They've got particularly better at it in more recent games, I think, because Final Fantasy 12, for example, you're kind of playing as the bad guy in one reading of it. Like
Yeah, 'cause you're just killing a bunch of Imperial soldiers who aren't really doing anything wrong.
well, yeah, I mean, and I guess the nation that Ash and whatever are kind of the leaders of is a nation that is questionable. So yeah, in Final Fantasy 12 they do that. In Final Fantasy 13 there is kind of the pushback against fate topic, which kind of rolls into what you're talking about whether what you're doing is necessarily an inherent good. So yeah, there is definitely that kind of rolls through more recent Final Fantasy games. Yeah. And yeah.
Do you feel like you have agency in the stories you played as well, or do you feel like you're just a sword machine for other characters?
Um
Clive wants to do what Clive wants to do so far. It just seems that like Clive realizes that in order to get things done, he has to follow orders sometimes.
Is there going to be a really bad
think-
scene where he realizes that he's fighting for the bad guys because he has to go kill his parents or something stupid, and then he tears up, and then he fights for them, and then now he's like a, you know,
No.
I have enough trust in this story to have it not do
No.
that.
I mean, if that were to happen, I wouldn't be too sad.
That's one of my least favorite tropes of all war media, is like the whole conflict is bad, but suddenly like one person who you care about gets hurt, and now suddenly war is bad. Like it's so silly. I don't like it.
I think,
yeah, it's not that.
Matt, does it do it? Good. Okay, cool.
No, you know, yeah, I don't want to give away too much, but
Yeah, please
I'm
don't.
really struggling here.
but
Matt is like screaming internally, being like, "I want to say."
I want to shut Trent down. He's come up with a stupid idea.
it is much more nuanced than that. There is another time jump that you haven't even got to yet, Alan. So things the complexion of the game changes a lot when you get to middle-aged Clive, and yeah, so I would
I
resist
refuse to
making
believe
too
there's
many.
anyone over the age of 30 called Clive.
I would resist to making any kind of assumptions about anything about what's going on just yet, because yeah, there's a lot that you haven't got up to, but
I'm very excited.
Alan, I don't want to ruin the
As long
game
as
for you,
Torgal's
but
alive.
there is Clive Palmer.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. How's the active lore thing working out, by the way? Is it like
Phenomenal.
it's
Best thing
working
they've
well?
ever done.
I mean, I think
I'm
that's a
very
that's a
okay
good,
with clicking a button to read a thing.
that is something that, to be honest, I kind of forgot about, but then I was playing the game so kind of intensely that I didn't need to the refresher as I was going along. But yeah, it is definitely a really useful feature, because there will be times that I would imagine most people will experience some kind of need to catch themselves back up for some kind of character or whatever that's popped up into a scene that they maybe don't remember from earlier scenes. And yeah, having that feature is useful, because it is a game that really kind of looks at the politics of war quite closely. There are a lot of clandestine plots, and there is a lot of ebbing and flowing of alliances and movements and political maneuverings and stuff. So it does have that level of complexity, and I think people will benefit from being able to just kind of pull up a summary of who's who and what's what as they go.
Yeah.
It's the first JRPG I think that's been designed with like parents in mind.
What do you mean?
And I kind of like, oh no, my kid has decided to suddenly crack the shits, and I have to stop playing for like 3 hours while I sort that out. Where the fuck was I?
That's
Oh
pretty
no.
funny.
You know what I mean?
Oh, if
Yeah.
that's the
The
case,
first like
sounds
bad
sounds
Final
like a
Fantasy.
perfect game for me if it's going to actually respect people's time, and I can pick it up like 20 years later and be like, "That's what I was doing."
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
That's what I
yeah, that's
hate
it.
about SNES RPGs.
Speaking of respecting people's time, it's actually quite short too, which is nice
I like that.
by
Yeah, but it's like
JRPG
30 hours or
standards.
something like that.
Yeah, you'll probably be able to. I mean, if you don't do the 100% thing, if you just work through the plot, which is
No,
yeah,
absolutely not.
most of it anyway, it'll only take you about 35-40 hours to work through, which it still sounds like a lot, but compared to the
That's a
100-hour
lot, but
games,
it's fine.
yeah, compared to the 100-hour games, I was surprised actually just how condensed it was as I was playing through, and I was watching my little percentage completed meter escalate quicker than I thought it would.
Suddenly
Yeah,
sounds like the perfect Final Fantasy for me. Like
they
it's
haven't
a
they
it's a
haven't
short
wasted.
game.
Yeah, they haven't wasted any time. They don't compromise any of the depth. Like there's just there's so much to talk about with that game.
How does the pacing go? Because one of my issues with
Well, that's
15
what I'm
was
saying.
that the
It's
story is
really good.
great, but every story beat you do, then there's a bunch of 3 hours of running around, driving around, and you forget what you've done previously.
Well, that's the problem with the open world thing. That's why Final Fantasy 15 had its issues, was because it did do the open world thing, and because it did the open world thing, the pacing got thrown off. And this is why I hate open world games, because it does ruin the pacing. But Final Fantasy 16 is linear. It's not
It's more FF10y.
it's not a corridor thing, so people aren't going to complain about that. But the open bits are quite condensed, and you do follow a trail of breadcrumbs through the thing. They're very carefully controlled the pacing so that you'll experience things in the right time. And yeah, it flows nicely. The movement through the plot is really good. So that was another good thing that it had going for it. The only time I ever felt like it was dragging on a little bit, where some of the really big boss battles can go for like 45 minutes from when you
No, I
kind of
love that.
from when you have
I
your
also
first
love that
when you swing the sword from the
Why
first time to when you finally put down the boss, it's like 45-minute long battle sequence. So
do you
that's
get breaks?
no.
Do you get a
Why would you
warning?
get breaks?
You have to pause it if you want to go and get a break, because yeah, it just doesn't, it just amps up in intensity. It keeps getting bigger and bigger in intensity. So
I just
uh,
hope the dialogue before you fight the boss is just like, by the way, this is going to take about 45 minutes, so get ready.
no, you know you're in for a big battle because they do a good job of ramping up to those battles. You know that it's coming. But yeah, they're pretty intense. They needed to be because they're highlights and it makes sense from a narrative and thematic perspective. But yeah, they're tiring. Every time I finish one of those, that was when I put the controller down for the rest of the day.
That's kind of nice too, because it
Respect
gives
that.
you it modulates pace, right? If you have a game that's this long, it's meant to be played over sessions. It's like it's good to have rises and falls so that you have spots to think and contemplate.
Yeah, yeah, and they do work into like chapters with kind of key highlight moments, and then it is a quiet period afterwards.
Mm,
So it has the downtime that you need to recover
I
from
respect
the
that.
physical and mental fatigue of those things, because they're also very, very visually intense. They're just exhausting to look at in a good way, I mean. But they are they're very, very dense moments in the game. So yeah, having the quiet time afterwards is a good thing as well. But yeah, it's just it's a fascinating game. I know most people are going to talk about the combat, and I've already read plenty of reviews where people just gloss over the plot, unfortunately. But
Most of the reviews, like if you just Google it right now, it'll be like Final Fantasy has a boring and bleak overworld, and it's like bad game. Like your response to this is like completely different to what every other reviewer is currently doing for this game, though.
I don't know if it's every other trend. It's got like a Metacritic of 88 right now. It's pretty
It's
people are pretty
doing well,
positive on it. But
except for Polygon. Polygon hates it. But
yeah, for stupid reasons. Um, frankly, Polygon people are reading
yeah,
just,
I was very
get better
confused
games
reading that
journalists. But
article.
Yeah,
yeah,
Polygon used to be the kind of group that would froth this.
Yeah, but they've got the group who have completed like a power unit at university and undergrad, and now they think they can analyze stories.
I mean, I can see where some of those how can I put this, reset era adjacent publications would have an issue with the game, because firstly the ethnic thing, or the lack thereof
Yeah,
in their view, which is nonsense. But anyway, another topic for another day. But also the way the game does handle some of its topics can, I guess, be confronting if you just don't think about it deeply enough. Like slavery is a theme through it, and it's a pretty major theme. It goes hand in hand with the war theme, really. um, and the way that the power dynamics within the game work, not just within the kind of master and slave, but the fact that the summons are all kind of enslaved in a way, and the dominants, which are the summoners, they've renamed them for this, but they've named them to dominants to kind of represent that relationship that they have with the summons. that is a key theme within it as well. So yeah, kind of the dynamic between the master and the kind of the enslaved is a key thing within it. So some of those publications that do a very shallow reading of that are going to find it uncomfortable, I think.
I mean,
But
that
that's
comes
kind
from
of
the
the
place
point.
of saying, yeah, it's coming from the place of saying like the games should be entertainment and they shouldn't raise
Yeah.
issues like that because it's uncomfortable.
Well, that's exactly it, and that's always the issue with the AAA space, I guess. There's that section of the community that just want to be entertained. They don't want to think about stuff, and the minute that a game comes along to do that, then they don't know how to handle it.
If anything, it's like the Western developers have gotten too good at making very unthematic games.
Exactly. Exactly. And they'll a Western developer like Call of Duty or whatever will come in and say, "Oh, we've made this game where war is hell," which we talked about earlier. And
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
yeah, sure, it's brutal and it doesn't look like a fun place to be, I guess. But what you're doing in it is fun, and you never actually question why you're doing what you're doing.
I'm
And
Yeah,
sure
here's
there's
this gun.
people
We should
in
just that copied it from like real life and like made it like really fun to shoot in the game and
yeah, and
like
there's cross
you're like,
sponsorship from gun companies.
yeah.
yes,
And
stuff
Mountain
like that.
Dew. Don't forget Mountain Dew.
Yeah, I swear that the games like that, there's got to be specific staff members on those teams whose job is just to go through and be like, remove anything that could be contentious because we don't
Well,
want
they
people
do
thinking about
because
this.
they do those games in kind of collaboration with the military. Like Call of Duty is actually made in collaboration with the military, so they have veto power over the stuff that's in it and stuff. That's why it's
Hmm.
so powerful as propaganda for getting recruitment and stuff. But yeah, I find the response to Final Fantasy XVI to be a little bit, I guess, disappointing. Not unexpected because I kind of went in figuring that it would have things to say, and the minute you have things to say, you lose a couple of points on your Metacritic. But yeah, for a
It's
game that
like
is
classic online discourse of like,
well,
you're not saying this in the exact way that I want you to say it, therefore it's bad.
it makes it difficult to justify those kinds of projects. Like Square Enix, I'm hoping will be happy with the response they've got to the game because most people are obviously enjoying it, but it doesn't have a Metacritic of Tears of the Kingdom or whatever. It doesn't have that 95 plus score. And the reason it does is just because there are always going to be 3 or 4 critics that don't like the narrative, that don't like what
Hmm.
it's got to say, because they've had the balls to say something. And as a result, they lose points of Metacritic. So it becomes very hard to justify making a game that has something to say when you know that it's going to cost you. So
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, it's quite a brave game, and it's hard to say. It's weird to say that about a massive blockbuster project, but they definitely took creative narrative risks with Final Fantasy 16, knowing that there was the chance that they would piss some people off, and
Yeah. It's
did
even
it
The
like,
anyway.
reason that
oh,
go for it, Harvard.
I feel like Square Enix is one of those developers, the few remaining ones where you could look up their interviews with the directors and they're still fixated on themes and narrative. Whereas it's getting more common for an upcoming AAA release to look at interviews with developers and you can't even tell what the story is about. You can tell what like the aesthetic theming might be like, but you just can't tell what it's going to be about.
Because Harvard, that's a spoiler if you tell people what the story's about.
How
I
dare you
have
reveal what happens
I
30
have
minutes in?
I have to say that as well. Actually, that's a good point that Trent just brought up. The most of the time, as a critic, when you get a game to review, you get it about a week before it releases these days, and they give you 6 pages, 7 pages, 8 pages of embargo conditions. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about stuff after chapter 5. Don't talk about what happens to this character. All of that stuff, right? The Final Fantasy 16 embargo. Well, we got the review code for it 3 or 4 weeks out. Actually, I've had it for ages,
Oh, I really
and
respect that.
which is respectable. But what really struck me was they just said, "Please respect spoilers." Like that's it. They didn't give us any conditions on it because they obviously wanted us to actually talk about it.
Mm.
And they didn't want us to put restrictions on what we could talk about, because if you do that, if you put restrictions on what people can talk about, then you don't get that depth through the reviews. And they respected the critical body overall enough
There's
to,
a level of confidence there
yeah,
that
yeah,
I
and
like a lot.
and it's a willingness to actually engage with the creative process, the creative side of the game, rather than just talk about how much fun it is to press buttons and how you feel because something happens to characters, which is basically all you can do with a Sony game in particular. Sony's really bad for it. They're really bad for restricting what you can talk about. Rather than just being able to talk about it in very vague senses. I was able to get really into the kind of meat of it with Final Fantasy XVI, and that is genuinely surprising for the blockbuster space these days. I was really, really amazed by it.
I mean, that's another problem with storytelling in general, I find nowadays. Like I saw in your review compared to Game of Thrones, one of the problems that I had with Game of Thrones is that people took plots to be narrative. They just went, if like the main point of watching is to find out who dies and when. And if you reveal who dies and when, then like there's no point in watching it anymore. Which is just such
Yeah, it was
such
very like
shallow
it was
discourse for
destination
stories.
orientated.
Yeah,
was
or
very,
not
very
even that. It's just like
destination
a factoid. Like you boil down your whole story to what happens and not why it happens or what it means that it happens.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's part of the issue with spoiler culture, right? That's how shallow a lot of pop entertainment is, that if you do spoil the plot, then as you say, there's nothing left to kind of, there's no reason left to watch it. You already know what happens. It's like having somebody ruin a sports game result for you, you know?
But even then, like it's fun to watch sports if you know who wins. Because
Well, it is, but at the same time, if the main reason you watch a sporting event is to see who wins, you know. So if somebody spoils it, there is some of the experience that's kind of been undermined, I guess. And that kind of, they apply that to a lot of the pop culture. You know, don't talk about who wins in the Avengers, because all that matters is who wins, or you know,
Who's
this
gonna
plot
win the
point, or
Avengers? I wonder
this
who.
character, you know, this character shows up setting up the movie down the track. It's all very, very shallow. Whereas Final Fantasy 16, it doesn't matter if you know what happens to Clive. I try not to spoil it anyway, but yeah, it kind of,
It becomes Jesus.
it's not so much it's not so much what happens to him, but why it happens, like you said, and kind of digging into the deeper themes of it and what it's actually saying with the character of Clive is much more important. So yeah,
I think
that's
that
do
is
want to make a
also
bet.
mainly. Sorry.
No, I want to make a bet. Clive either A, becomes God, B, kills God and becomes God, or C, dies trying to kill God.
This isn't Saints Row.
that's Final Fantasy bingo right there.
It is. It's also like every single Xenosaga game or Xenogears game or Xenoblade. How many gods can we kill in one franchise?
What I was going to ask Matt was, do you think that with some like more like the game brands like say Sony and stuff like that, a lot of like video games, their characters are basically the focal point, that they're like the big brand. So it's like, you know, Sony's like, we've got these Horizon characters, we've got, you know, our characters from The Last of Us and all this other stuff, and they're the focal point in their marketing and their branding. So when they, you know, put all these embargo restrictions down, are they basically, you know, is it in a way saying that, okay, we want positive, you know, branding for our characters, which are our prime marketing, and you know, if we get negative reviews, it means that our brand characters are responded to negatively, and that can impact us as a brand. Whereas someone like, you know, Square Enix with Final Fantasy, these characters aren't going to be in the next Final Fantasy. Like they're going to throw that all out the window, and there's going to be another, you know, game. So they're more willing to take risks and not, I guess, hurt the characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what gives the series so much freedom compared to so many other games, is that their series is built on a continuing experience rather than specific characters and plot elements.
I mean,
It's
it's
thematic
difficult
sequels. It's
because
not. It's yeah.
I do think that the characters are kind of critically important to Square Enix and Final Fantasy. Um, and if people were ever to not like one of the characters, that would be a problem for them still. Like for a really good example is that of that is what's his name, Vaughn from Final Fantasy 12. It's just as well for that game that it ended up being an ensemble cast, perhaps because they realized midway through that nobody was going to like his Vaughn.
You telling me
And-
you don't like this dweeb with his
Yeah.
friend who hates rats?
It's just,
You
it's
telling me
just,
that?
it's just amazing how they go to all the effort to set him up as the major character, and then just kind of subtly Jar Jar binks him out of it as the game goes along.
Now it's really important because Bosch is talking, Ash
Yeah.
is talking, Van's
Oh,
standing in the corner facing
oh.
the wall with a dunce cap on.
Look,
That's so
look how
funny.
cool Balthier is. You know, he's just the coolest guy, and he and Ash are going to have this great relationship, and they're really cool characters. And
Also,
yeah, Van's also in the
Van's
corner
here.
over there. You know, it is
Pamela's
funny.
there too, but she's got a hat on backwards.
So yeah, the characters are really important to Final Fantasy, and I think Clive is a critical character. I mean, he's even more critical than most because he is the only character in Final Fantasy 16. You've got other people kind of drop in and out of his party, but he and the puppy are the only two characters that are kind of permanently in that game. So if people didn't respond well to Clive, then they'd be in trouble. But at the same time, you are right in the sense that, oops, just hit my microphone. You are right in the sense that they do change characters from game to game. So they can take more creative risks, I guess, with them. They can do things to them that perhaps they can't to other games without causing issues. So yeah, there is some creative freedom there, I think, and they do take
They could
advantage of that.
even write a sub story that continues the story on, where the main character of the game kicks a landmine and dies, and that's his end.
Final
So
Fantasy
happen?
Even do that.
X2, yeah, Final Fantasy X too.
No, Final Fantasy X 2.5.
When Laffy Laugh carks it, so they focus on the good characters in the sequel.
No,
So
no,
that's
like
so funny.
it's really, really strong because it's like the written like novel and like the audio play that they made. Tidus
I-
was like having an argument with Yuta, is on a beach, thinks he sees a blitzball, but it's actually a mine that's left over from the Machina War. Kicks it, dies, his head explodes. And that's Tidus.
I must say I'm very happy that Clive doesn't laugh in the game because Square
Clive is
Enix
a very good
doesn't
voice. All the voice acting is very good.
Square Enix doesn't have a good track record of having characters laugh.
They don't have a good track record of protagonists. I'm surprised you like him so much.
Actually, the thing is, Clive really surprised me because I thought he was going to be this squall-like character early on, like this dude that's like stoic and dead inside. But yeah, you warm to him as you go along.
Mm,
You definitely
that's a
he
He's
did
not just a dick.
yeah
he's a
he-
dick with feelings.
yeah
Yeah.
he's a really surprisingly sympathetic character, and the way he bounces off the other characters is really good too. There's a lot more nuance in the character writing than some of the Final Fantasy games of earlier. Like the earlier Final Fantasy games used characters as kind of they had very archetype characters that they were just kind of one role within the story. They
Yeah.
were one type of character. They had a very singular focus on how they presented that character. Whereas Clive is a much more nuanced person. He has a sense of humor, as you find out later on. You know, he's he's got the mission that he's on, and he's quite focused on that. But at the same time, the other characters in interacting with him bring out other qualities within him, and yeah, he's just a really, really interesting character. So
Hmm. See, I was
I
even
must-
So yeah, go
concerned
play Final Fantasy
because
16.
they.
I must say it is it's quite a funny because I was talking to the PR person after I wrote the review, and he was like, I was very unsure about how you would go with this, given that it's a blockbuster. So I must have a reputation out there for just hating on blockbusters. But
That's very funny.
Final Fantasy 16 kind of proves that if you do it right, then you convert me to even the biggest budget games there are.
I mean, the problem's never with blockbusters. That was never the problem.
No, it's how they handle them. That's always been the problem.
The problem was with investors
Yeah.
and mass marketing.
The problem
And-
wasn't the size; it was how you use it. I said
Yeah,
that really
exactly,
quietly.
Exactly that. Too many other games are Ghost Recons, and shallow as anything. So yeah, Final Fantasy 16, very good game, deep
Go
story,
play it.
lots of conversations about war. I hope that people continue to talk about it. I get the feeling that they will. Like, I don't think this game's going away, like Final Fantasy 15 kind of did.
It's got meme potential, which is all it needs.
But you need a PS5, so
Well, it's also got
Yeah.
it's also got that depth that, you know, the more academically inclined people are going to write their essays about and stuff. So there's going to be a lot of thought put into this game, which is going to ensure that it endures a bit like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and whatever. So yeah, good return to form for the series as well, after 13 was a little bit too obscure for a lot of people, and 15 was just not
It
what
was
people
fine.
wanted. I enjoyed it, but I understand why a lot of
Yeah.
people did not. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good that we've got it back on form, that just about everybody, old Final Fantasy fans and new alike, can enjoy it.